Just a reminder, Thursday. Thursday's class is held in RIC 120. And I'm going to end class a little earlier today. I'm going to give you a chance to brainstorm and think about topics that you might want to research. So come to room 120 when you come in to RIC, go past the circulation desk, and it's the first room. This Thursday. And I will book another date, but I just wanted to do the preliminary. So this Thursday, what they will do is walk through the premise of just setting up your research, how to actually initiate the research. We'll go to sites that are credible sites. They'll show you the sites through Damon that you can get on and search. And we'll talk about keywords to use so that you drive your research down to a level that's easily handled for you. Because you can put in a word like learning disabilities. Well, you're going to come up with thousands and thousands and thousands of sites and searches. So I want you to narrow your search, so we're going to talk about that a little bit at the end of class. How to narrow it down to a topic that's easily manageable. Because don't forget, I'm saying 5 pages for your research paper. So I'm not overwhelming, but I want to make sure you have the standards of citing it and looking at it. God bless you. You can bring your own laptops, iPads, if you'd like. If not, they have the bank of laptops there that you can use. The only good part is if you find some sites and you want to start saving, if you have your own or a thumb drive, or you want to send it on to the cloud or your email, that way you have it with you to get started. And the other good news is, quick news, they've moved up my daughter-in-law's due date to next week sometime. We will find out. So they're probably going to induce her, which is exciting, and yes, but things are moving a little bit rapidly. So I will let you know if something happens, because I'll have to be on board for Scotty, or I'll bring him along and bring him to class with me. I'm sure he'll enjoy himself. So look for any posts, because everything's still on. The other, I checked on those videos. I don't know why they didn't transfer when I tried to transfer them over from iTunes. Remember the one assignment for self-esteem? There were 2 videos that I pulled up, School Failure 1 and School Failure 2. They will be posted today, because Kathy and I went back in, and for some reason it didn't post. So they will be on today. And no, it wasn't due today. It's not due to next Thursday, because we're going to RIC. So you can get started on it, but I posted up some of the further chapters on too. So I wanted to just quickly go through the review of looking through cognitive learning theories that we did in the chapter, and then finish this up and move on, because I want some. So I want to do a review here for this. This is another piece of information I'm just bringing in from some of my materials, the triune brain. And we think about the 3 parts of the brain of laterality, centering, and focus. And how do we as teachers address those parts of the brain when we're providing the curriculum information, but it may be adapting so everybody with all their different learning styles and all parts of the brains are activated. So you think about laterality, and that's in the cortex area. So what you can do for that, and you think about young children, when they come into the classroom, it's that social skill, labeling, communication. So that's why you see preschool, kindergarten teachers, the whole room is labeled. You see labels on desk, podium, teacher's desk. Did you ever view that in the classrooms? Did you see? That is why, because that's that initial communication skill that you have to teach to give them the language in order to be successful. And then you think about the left hemisphere at that time. They're thinking about cause and effect of things. Sequencing is such an important skill to teach them. The order of their day. Where do we begin? What comes next? You give them the agenda for the day. You do that in a morning message. With your adolescent students, you should have posted each period, and I know that's tough, but you should post for them the goals and what you're going to accomplish during that class period. Whether you're going to start with discussion, and then you go to a group work, then you're going to work on a project, give them that information before you begin. The language, the content, always thinking about those auditory pathways for reading. Reading is not interacting if they're sitting and staring and reading the material on their own. So give me some of the pathways we have used in this class to help you for reading. Perfect. Think, pair, share. So you're both reading the information, you're putting it together, you're thinking about it, and sharing it out. What are some other pathways?
Chunking.
Chunking, which is so important when you break it down. Has it been easier for you as I chunked the information? So you can go and read it in your text, but once we bring it in and we chunk it and we put it together, it makes more sense. What's another pathway I've kind of used? You may not be really, I haven't said to you, this is another pathway we're using, but think of how else I've helped you with understanding the reading. What else have we done? Sharing your thoughts out loud. And I also gave you, what did you do? You displayed the charts. So you not only shared it, discussed it, and you shared it in written form. And then you shared it out loud. So think about all those avenues that you may not be paying attention to right now to help you think about and absorb the information. In the corpus callosum, that's the right hemisphere, they see the whole picture. So what you need to do is chunk and then bring it back so that they see the whole picture. And that's what I'm trying to help you see what's going to happen after we learn all these theories and we know about brain research and learning and environment. The whole picture is, what does it look like when you're out in the real world and practicing? And the visual way of storing and producing. If you don't transfer it, it's going to be gone. So you have to figure out ways that I'm helping you transfer the knowledge of what we're learning into your long-term memory. It's like the filing cabinets in your head. Your brain files, sorts, and it stores it. But you have to create those connections by storing it, by thinking about it, and putting it into places that you can retrieve it. And then the centering is your midbrain. And remember we talked about the crossover? Some young children sometimes have not achieved that crossover between right and left side. And you actually see the activities if they're holding the pencil in the right hand. They'll be drawing a picture and they get halfway through the page and they switch their hand. That means they have not crossed the midline yet. That means the right-left brain has not yet connected totally between the two activities. So they actually stop and you'll see them. They'll write something and all of a sudden they switch hands and they finish it. It's a pretty interesting thing to see, but now you'll know what's happening. They do that if they're hopping or if they're walking on the line. They'll get part way and then they switch. You think about the animal nature in the midbrain, all your emotions. This is key, making associations. That's called relevance. If you can get them to make associations when I learn this, oh yeah, now that makes sense when I'm learning the new information. And that's what I'm trying to connect for you. When we're learning this, you're going to see the application move on. All those connections, relevance. In this morning's class, we used that article, and I did post it on Edmodo, the article about Dr. Math, they call him. Last week, it was in the Buffalo News. The Buffalo City Schools have hired this mathematician, they call him Dr. Math, to come in to do a study on the school and find out why they see certain groups of people performing poorly in math. And when we look at our multiple intelligence worksheets that you had, you look at that math logical area. There's specific skills that you use when you're mathematical logically thinking. You think of sequence, you think of putting things in groups, but the most important thing is relevance. So when we talked in this morning's class and we looked at the article again, and we'll bring it back and talk about it, they found the data showed that African American males in the city of Buffalo underperformed, way underperformed in mathematical tasks. So they did more research, and what the Dr. Math had said, it's not relevant to them. Because he found You know when you do those interest surveys we talked about in class and you find out what your students are most interested in? They found the African American students, the male students, were most interested in hip hop and sports. So think about math in relevance to that. Think about your interest. Do you think they're interested in mathematical situations and critical thinking? That's not an interest. So he's reversed the thinking and he said, in order to teach effectively and have the most success, it's like that in your life. If it's not relevant, do you remember it? Your goal was to learn to drive. That was relevant for you, right? So you did anything and everything you could to learn to drive because it was so relevant. So think of the things that you did to learn to drive. You were reading the manual, you were checking online, you were studying the streets, you were studying the rules of the road, you probably took driver ed, you went out numerous times and you actually did hands-on practice driving. You have a certain number of hours in. Think of the time dedication it took. Now think of something else that was totally irrelevant to you in school, that you didn't spend much time on because you really didn't care about learning. Can you think of something that, I always think about trigonometry. It's not an application level for me. When am I ever going to use trig? And I worked and worked and worked at it, but I hated it. It wasn't relevant. So think about those things that you teach or that you're trying to learn that are not relevant to you, that you have to make relevant and build those connections. So what the Dr. Math is doing now, and that article you can go back and read it because it's in Edmodo in the materials, he has turned math into relevant for those specific groups of students to make success. So think about it. If you created a football grid field in your classroom and you started to teach statistics, measuring, alignment, think of the group work you could do to teach mathematical skills using that motivation. So that's what he's currently doing. He's been hired. I believe he's training the teachers right now. So think about the relevance in your class. And it's going to be hard that you're not going to create an individual lesson for every single student because not every single student are going to like the same thing. But you try to give it an overall feeling. If you know that you have a large group of musically inclined students in your class, that's one of the best things. If you put anything to music and rhyme, your memory is triggered like 50% better. That's why you teach the alphabet song. That's why you teach rhymes. Think of early on, you probably learned a lot of rhymes. I think they've moved away from them but coming back because they're finding poetry, rhyming, it triggers the memory. So think of the Mother Goose rhymes you learned. Think of when you were learning how to jump rope. Many teachers put many learning things to rhymes in the classroom or songs. And that's why. Do you remember where the fight or flight was? Or did I say in the brain, the fight or flight? I showed you with my brain lamp, and I'm going to bring that back in. Remember what I said with the... Pardon me? Right here. Fight or flight. It's right down here. And remember I showed you with the brain lamp? If you're activated in that fight or flight, that's when you're highly stressed, you're angry, you're kind of like out of control, it shuts down the whole rest of your brain. So you can't process. You're not taking in information because you're down here. And that's what the conversation I would have with students that were really out of control in the classroom. It's when the teacher called and said, have to remove this kid. He's angry, he's throwing things. And I'd have that conversation with them to de-escalate and calm them down. Then we go on to the brainstem. That's the reptilian. That's further down. And that's the nonverbal. So that's where all the learning happens through movement, through modeling. So you as the teacher, whatever you're modeling, think of what stage that is. Where do you think that nonverbal expression, what age roughly? Where children, what stage are they totally nonverbal? Babies. Birth to, roughly they start acquiring sounds somewhere around, it depends on the child. With more modeling, they acquire them earlier, but you'll hear the initial sounds of ba-ba. They're trying to make sounds and produce the B sound, the D sound early on. So that's that early stages before they start to talk. So everything is happening for them through movement and modeling. They're watching, they're observing, they're taking in those senses. Come on in. Hi. I was just talking about the 2 videos that you were going to work on.
Yes.
Find out why they.
No, I just wanted to keep going, but I wondered if, because I haven't uploaded them, if you have enough space on that, I'd have to finish today's video.
Ew, that's a good question. Okay, we'll finish this and then let's
Yeah,
check.
yep.
Okay, so think about the unconscious things that are happening. If you set routines in your classroom, that's how you build the modeling and that brain power. Think of the routines in your life. If you know routines, set routines are happening, don't you function better? The same thing with your class. If you set up classroom routines, it goes back to your expectations in class. It will provide for them the structure to learn the material through the routines. Another name for routines is ritual. So something that becomes a habit for you. And how long does it take to build a habit or extinguish a habit? 4 weeks minimum. How do you know that? Okay. And so they say the opposite is true. If there's a negative habit that you're trying to extinguish or you're trying to help a child with a habit undo a habit, it's going to take at least that long also. So think about what happens with habits. Habits become a part of your life because why do we acquire certain habits? Things you don't even realize you're doing all the time. Okay, so if it's a habit that you've acquired, you've learned through mistakes, you've learned through poor modeling, right? No one corrected you and you just carry on that habit. You'll say, sometimes it's like pronunciation of words or something different. I think of Mrs. Z. Her habit of mine is yoga, meditation. That's her habit because she's built it into her routine, and that's just a part of her. So right now, it's been repetitive for so many years that it's a natural habit. Well, kids come to you with some of those habits, some of those things that either you need to correct, undo, or you build on those habits with other positive things. Again, we get into the rhythm. You think about the rhyme, the music, how it activates the brain. Early on, think about this. Heartbeat and breath. And we know the benefits of good breathing. I'll let you do your little spiel because you are going to come in and do that. Tell them about habits of breathing.
Oh, to say that we ignore that. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Don't think about your breath at all. Your breath is very important to the health of your nervous system, the state of the mind, and your gut, too. Your breath is very important to all. So a habit of creating a habit of bringing your focus back to your breath, strengthening the diaphragm, breathing deep, evenly, smoothly, without pause, strokes, or breaks between your inhalation and exhalation is a good thing to have. A real good thing to have.
I used to, when I was teaching the test-taking skills, and actually do it as a prep for the students before state assessments. Think about your body condition, what you're feeling. You have to become really in tune to how you're feeling physically, your neck. Think about what happens when you go into a situation like, say, a midterm. How does your body feel at that time? Becoming aware of those feelings. How do you physically feel when you're in a situation like that? Pardon me?
Nervous.
Nervous. And so that nervous feeling, how does that feel like in your system, like physically? what are you actually feeling? Like, do you feel any parts of your body? Are you more aware of, say, your neck? Like, if I'm carrying stress, instantly it's in my shoulder and my neck. And you start feeling that sense of kind of pressure pain. Sometimes you feel like in your hands, right? So, and it starts affecting, as Mrs. Z said, your breathing, and affects your whole system. You can feel it in your stomach. You feel it down your back. So you think about that in infants. What have they babies in the womb? How they know those environmental sounds around them in the womb. So they recognize their mom's voice. Know the sounds around. Remember, I said, sorry for my grandson. He's listened to Fire Hall all this 9 months, and then he's going to be aware of those sounds around him. But think of children, young children. The breathing in the classroom, what you can do to help them with that calmness, especially children who have hyperactivity disorder. There's so many things that you can do with behavioral situations in your classroom to actually help the child other than meds. By breathing, by situational movements. You get the what we were going to talk about today, the brain gym, to help them reactivate their thinking and breathing. I always taught the kids when they're taking a test, I always gave them the little stress balls to hold on to, because that helps with at least activating, reactivating, and think about the brain. Is it off?
No, you've got 21 minutes.
Oh, awesome. And I would teach them the deep breathing. I would also teach them, if they got partway through, and you know when you're reading something, you read it over and over and over again, it just doesn't make sense. I always tell them, put down your work, even in state assessment. Close your eyes. Become more aware of your breathing. Take a few deep breaths, and then come back and try to read it again. And that works for you if you're reading out loud, or you're reading a chapter like all of the theories, and you're having a tough time with it. In reaction to things that happen, not directed by the front brain. This is a reactionary. When you're in that fight or flight in the brain stem area, it's more emotional reaction. That's when you don't think before doing something. That's when you see the most accidents. We kind of laugh, but it's not funny, but full moons, it really does have an effect on people and irrational thinking. In the fire department, we have the worst calls, the worst emergencies during a full moon, the most car accidents. It's because that non-thinking is just reaction to things. It's when you're texting and not thinking about it, when you're driving. That split second makes a difference. So I wanted to give you a quick review through that, and I wanted to show you this is part of what happens when you practice the little brain gym and this whole brain theory. You teach the students to pace themselves. And PACE stands for positive, active, clear, and energetic. So you actually teach them the strategies. So hookups for positive activates the sensory and motor cortex in both hemispheres. Okay, let's practice a hookup. Just everyone stand up. You can do it sitting down, but let's stand up. Oh, okay, yeah. I'll drive over there. Oh, perfect. Thank you. A hookup. Oh, see. You just put your arms like this, twist them, and cross them over. And then you pull them in. I know, it's directionality, okay? Like this. You flip them and pull them in. And then when you do a proper hookup, you cross over your legs. And you should put the tongue on the top of your mouth. And now to do some deep breaths. What you just did was activate both sides of your brain together. A cross crawl. I know, it takes practice. And you teach that to the kids because that helps them activate that sensory. A cross crawl is for activity where you want to get the motor sensory going at the front lobes. And cross crawl is actually this. You take your right elbow to your left knee. And you just do this slowly with your class. You do it in a motion like this. And that's a cross crawl. Try that. Left to right. You're doing crossover left to right hemisphere. Now just think what the motion itself is doing for you in the crossover. The kids think this is lots of fun. The brain buttons actually help clear your oxygen to your brain because we know your brain is made up of oxygen and water. Brain buttons are actually, brain buttons. Down here underneath in your collarbone, you'll feel like an indentation area. You take 2 fingers, and you find that area, you'll see it, and you just massage it. It reactivates oxygen up to your brain so that you'll feel a little bit more clear level thinking. And then you do the opposite. I've also taught them that when you do the opposite, you switch hands, you center yourself by putting the other hand on your abdomen. And it actually brings oxygen up to your brain. So when they're getting stressed and they can't think and you're working on something, they'll automatically, you'll see the kids automatically do the brain buttons. It's like that activity. And then the big thing, okay, you can sit down. The big thing I always talk to them about, you must have your constant water with you all day long. Because it's 78% of your body weight, you have to keep your brain nourished with water all day long. If you wait until you're already parched, you're already dehydrating. So think about that. Having your water with you all the time is creating the energy. Now, think about it. You always want to, I taught you the steps, you want to begin at the bottom because you start with your water, you bring your oxygen up, you do the cross crawl to bring the left to right together, and then the hookups is what grounds you, and then you're calm to begin. So when you're doing transitions between subject areas, you're just coming back in from lunch, it's a great time to do the pace. And I would get used to doing the pace throughout the day, many times during different times of movement, because it helps center them back down. Now, one of the things you might think about, if you're interested in is doing a brain gym research for your research paper. Because with brain gym, I think I had told you, there are different parts of the brain that you activate through brain gym activities. So you see for reading skills, you want to cross the visual midline, and these are some activities that actually help with your reading. So you see like the cross crawl, and there's many different ways of doing that to cross over. If you do an oral reading, the kids like this energy yawn. It actually is like a yawn. You open up your mouth and you activate by doing that, and that helps you with the oral reading. So different parts of your brain are controlled with the different activities you're doing. If you're working on, let's go to reading comprehension. There are different activities you can do for that. If you're looking at thinking skills, these are called the space buttons. That's like the buttons. If you're really trying to work on critical thinking. Spelling. The kids used to love this one, the thinking cap. We used to talk about, you know how the teachers would say, put on your thinking cap? Well, if you're really thinking about trying to spell words, you actually start at the bottom of your lobe and you work up and massage around your earlobes and down around. And it really does help. They activate new spelling and word. Try it sometimes if you really are stressed about the spelling. Math. The kids love this one, the elephant. You do the air riding with it using your hands. It's pump. And you can do the variety, change them up with the variety. And the kids don't have to know. We're just doing a stretch and brain activities. So when you're switching into math mode, try it. There's all kinds of research on the brain gym. Denison is one of them. This is locally, it's called the Balance Associates that do the brain gym. One of the students last semester did their research paper on brain gym and found so many resources. And I said, try to find something in the research paper that you're going to actually learn to apply, because it's more important to do that to take away. So now let's go back into your book to finish up this chapter. I wanted to address page 65, Teaching to the Magic Middle. At the bottom of page 65, reaching every student, teaching in the magic middle. Now that you know about brain research, read that last paragraph and then think, pair, share. Come up with a definition in your own terms about what is the magic middle and why is that so important for you to know as a teacher. How can you apply that? What would you do? Did you find it? It's chapter 2. I think it's 6. Okay, read that small part about the magic middle. Come up with a definition in your own words. What is the magic middle? What would that mean to you as a teacher? How would that help you inform yourself about instruction in your classroom, knowing that magic middle? And what does it mean? You can think, pair, share on it. She's out in the zone. Oh, now you just totally stressed her out. She's now in fight. She's gone from my class. we used to do that with the students. We have a great, well, it's not, it's building empathy. And we used to do that with our students. We brought in, there's a local group that does that, and they come to school. And they, I think I talked about this, they place the kids in a wheelchair and they have them maneuver around an obstacle course. They blindfold them and they have them feel the braille machine and say that you can't look at what you're reading.
They last for 4 hours.
Right, and just feel, it's to build the empathy of what it's like to be totally physically disabled or blind. It builds a whole other understanding of habits that we take for granted, like hearing. Why don't you do it like if you're deaf? And you're in a public place for 4 hours not hearing a sound. Think about what other senses would take over. Yeah. It is. Yeah, it just muffles, it's not totally. Okay, let's talk about the magic middle. Give me some explanation of what you came up with in your own terms. What is the magic middle? What does it mean to you? Did you do it together?
It's when they get bored with the information and they're not frustrated because they can't learn it. It's that spot where it's not things you already know, but it's not beyond your abilities to know.
Perfect. Good way to explain it.
So teachers pair like one student that doesn't understand the activity with someone who does. So with having those combined, they can bounce off of each other's ideas and make a final opinion as to how to do or achieve the activity that they're doing in class.
Perfect example. Good. Someone else, tell me your definition of a magic middle.
I said like the same thing as they did.
So it's like the just right spot. And when we teach children early literacy skills, the balanced literacy, we teach them about the just right level books. And when you get into your literacy, that's part of the instruction. And you'll think about even with adolescents. When children are growing up, they equate the size of the book, right, with the level of reading, right? And you send children to the library, and what do young children want to do? Yeah, they want to pick out a chapter book. But I really can't read this, they say. So we always say, well, we're going to let you choose 2 to 3 different books. One book we want you to read on your just right level. And we teach them how to determine what their just right level is. Do you remember doing that in school? Did your teachers ever teach you? How do you figure out a just right book that you know it's the perfect level for you to read, to comprehend on your own? Remember.
Don't you like turn to a chapter in the middle of the book and you like read the first page to yourself or something
Yeah,
like that?
you read the first page to yourself and then what?
I just remember
That's a good lead. That's
yeah.
When you're reading that book and you're reading the first page, it's like the 5-finger rule. 5 words you don't know on the page, that's not just right. That's a little too hard. That's a little too challenging. So the just right is where you're able to read fluently, and you're going to hear those terms in literacy. A fluent reader means you're able to read comfortably all of the words on the page and understand what you've read. If it's too challenging, what's happening with your brain? It gets frustrated because your brain is concentrating so hard and just trying to make sense of the letters and the words that you're not comprehending what the activity is or what the reading is. So I would venture to say some of your college level materials, because we know, do you know what reading level typically like newspapers, magazines are written on? Usually around the 5th grade reading level. So when you think about students in poverty who have never been exposed to reading other things at home, who have very few books, and you're trying to use newspapers and other things to motivate their thinking and reading, It's usually very difficult. Why do you think newspapers are written on a 5th grade level? There are some articles that could be more challenging, but why do you think they're heading around 5th grade?
For people that didn't get the education.
Correct. Because they feel that for most people, they could be successful at reading a newspaper article at a 5th grade level. So when you're thinking about your just right materials for kids in the classroom, you have to think about the process with the brain and the magic middle. And I heard, what is the magic middle like? What do we learn about earlier on in the chapter?
Oh, is that what you said?
What was, right, the zone of, right, proximal ZBT. CBD is like the magic middle. It is the zone. If you're in the zone with something, you know you're going to be much more successful. If it's something you really wanted to do, like learn to drive, you were in the zone. And it didn't matter if you couldn't comprehend everything that you read. You're going to practice until you get that down. And that's what you do with kids. It doesn't have to be all about just the reading and writing. It's the project base and the activity base. So you think here, 5 steps to integrated learning. It goes back to the same thing we just talked about. Prepare to learn. That's the pace. You have to actually prepare your mind and body and your kids to learn. You just don't rush in and all of a sudden, I'm ready to learn. That doesn't happen. Typically it doesn't happen. I'm sure, think about when it's something that you really have to struggle learning or reading. Do you just like sit down and automatically start to learn? How do you prepare yourself when it's something that you really have to read well or learn or memorize? Think about what your strategies are to help yourself. What's something you may not pay attention to that's a habit now that gets you ready to learn? Versus going out and being at a social event, which is a different activity. Think about it. What do you do to prepare yourself? Do you sit in the same place? Do you go to a certain place? Do you prepare your area in a certain way? McKinley, what's something you do to prepare yourself to, if there's something you really have to learn or read?
I sit down, like get a table or something, put everything out in front of me, like get my laptop open, and then I listen to music.
Perfect. So you organize yourself by having everything in place, and then you're ready to go. Listen to music, and then that activates your learning. Okay? How many of you go to the same place all the time? Okay? So that's your area that tells your brain, I'm getting ready to really learn this information. This is what I need to do. You might sit in a certain way. Some might prefer sitting on the floor. Some might prefer sitting in a harder chair. Some have a comfortable chair or couch. You turn down the lights, turn on the music. You might lay back. But those are what you've now trained yourself to do when you have to learn something. And you have to help your kids get comfortable with that. You set your goals, and that's exactly what McKinley just said. He set his goals by having everything out in the pattern, then he's ready to go. So setting your goals might be you give yourself a certain amount of time. You check the clock and you say, like in another hour, I should be done with this task. I'm setting my goal to this. I'll be done with this reading, whatever it is that you need to do. Then you pre-check. How do you pre-check yourself for your learning? I'm sure all of you do.
Create a list of what's most important to least important.
Okay, and then you look at the list and you say, well, these are the things I really feel comfortable that I kind of already know. These are some things I might struggle with. Okay, so you create a list. That's your pre-check for learning. You go through the chapter. Before I began the chapter, before I begin any information, I put the vocabulary up for you. And what do I say? What do I say when I give you the new vocabulary for the chapter? Which ones do you really not know? Which one do you think you have no clue about? And tell me which ones you're most comfortable with. Why do I do that? That's my pre-gauge for your learning. Why do I do that?
So you know what we have to focus on.
Right, right. I check your understanding By the questions, by the discussion, I check your understanding, and then I know what we have to focus on. So you do that automatically. Then comes the lesson. So you teach it in many different modalities. You're feeling it, you're touching it, you're moving with it, you're talking about it. Some of you might read your things out loud to yourself. That's how you teach yourself, and that's okay. You've learned to adapt. It's only not okay when you're sitting in a public or in a, like the Rick Center, and you have to be quiet and you're reading out loud to yourself. So you choose a place that you could read out loud to yourself. Some listen to books on tape. Some share reading and talk about it with others. So there's many different ways you can activate your modalities and use all your senses to learn. And then you do your post-check. Check your progress. Don't you stop midway through when you're working on something? Do you go straight through 3 hours? No. What do you do partway through? Take a break. You get up. You kind of walk around. You think about what you've read. You might draw a picture. You take notes. You might check your notes. So that's part of the whole learning. And if you look at the visual here, this is the midline. This is the just right. That's where it should be integrated. And you think along here, the creativity, the learning, the growing, that's everything happening here midway. So over here on this side is like the new learning, where you stop and you're kind of like in low energy. Here you're in higher energy. You're really comfortable. So you need that comfortable zone midway where it crosses over and everything comes together. Now when we're thinking about teaching in the classroom, and we're thinking about active learning, which is what we read in the chapter about taking all that cognitive, the social, active engagement. If you don't have your kids actively engaged in learning, you can work and work and work all day, and they're not going to achieve a success. Remember that visual I showed you about what they remember through lecture? What was the highest rate of retention on that chart? What was the most memory? What was the one area on that chart? Teaching. When they actively are learning, they're teaching someone else. That's when they'll actively engage. So think about these activities. When students know what they need to learn, that's important. Don't make learning a secret to them. They need to have the goals in front of them. Today you are going to accomplish, and you give them the goals. Don't you ask first, well, what am I going to learn? What are we going to do today? That's why kids come into the classroom and they say, what are we doing today? Like that commercial, what's for dinner? Why do people come home and say, what's for dinner? Why do they want to know?
So excited. They want it, like they're excited, they want to know it.
Right, right. Is it something that's going to be good? Do I really want to have dinner here? Or am I going to leave? What are we going to eat today? That's setting a goal, and it's setting the mindset. Well, the same thing with learning. You have to help them understand why we are learning this. That's that relevant piece. We're learning this so that you are successful in, and you give them that information. Then you tell them how we're going to go about the learning. So here's that chart again, the average rate of retention. You practice by doing, but the highest rate is you teach others immediately. So when you think pair share, you're reading it, your partner's reading it, and you're teaching each other by discussing it. Okay, this is one other activity. Now these are all activities that you could do in the classroom. Heads together. Heads together. You have 3 or 4 kids together and you number each student. And like when I count down when we go into groups, the teacher gives them a question. You present to them a question. And we know the old saying, 2 heads are better than 1. That's the truth. When you give a group a question to discuss, what happens? As soon as I say, and when we're working in class like this, you're all completely quiet. As soon as I pose a question and I say, discuss it, come back, what do I hear? I hear all of you actively talking about it because you're making sense of it. And then the teacher calls out a certain number, he chooses a number, and that person answers. So it makes everyone engaged in the learning because you don't know what number the teacher's going to call out. And if you do that, it diffuses that one kid in the classroom that's always up and the other kid that shies away from answering. So that's another way, like sticks in the can. Some other activities. We do this, think, pair, share. Stop, summarize, and share. Remember thinking about the amount of time that it takes to activate a new learning based on the age of the students you're working with. So that's a perfect time to stop. Right after that, you stop, summarize, and share. And they get used to that. Okay, let's summarize what we just talked about. Names in the can, we use. Choral response. That helps in the security for those students who are not sure of their learning. And if you have them, you go 1, 2, 3, and everybody responds together. You can do that using whiteboards. You give them whiteboards and you say, on the count of 3, show me your answer. Well, that's non-intimidating to students because only you're seeing the answers. So if a student's afraid and you're giving them math problems, you have them write the answer, you hold up the answer. Nobody else sees it, only the teacher. Quick assessment for the teacher. You can quickly scan and you go, okay, got it. Okay, have to do a little bit more. So you see it right away. It's an immediate response. Question and then all right. You pose a question and you say go. Everyone write the answer. That's another way to do like the whiteboard. Send a problem. You pose a question or you're doing some kind of work. The answers are placed on the back. The team sends the problem. Receiving team solves the question, and the questions are clarified. So you're working in teams. One person has the answer on the back. They go to another team. The other team has to come up with what was the question. You know, walk around the world. You've probably done that in math and spelling. I like this, ask 3 before me. You start that early on. Do you know what that means, ask 3 before me? Because what do young children always do? Before they stop and think about solving something, who do they always go to? The teacher. And you know, when the teacher's working with another small group, and if this one student keeps coming over to the teacher, and you have to say to them, right now I'm working with this group. So if you have a question, or you're not sure, you train experts in your classroom, so that one is an expert for this, one is an expert for that. So if a child has a question during that time, they go to the expert. They ask 3 before me. Before you can come to the teacher, you have to ask 3 peers first to clarify, to help you. And if not any of the peers can solve that problem for them, then they go to the teacher. So that eliminates that I'm the only one that can answer correctly for you. And it gives them the opportunity to search for others. Outcome sentences. I do this a lot with exit tickets. Sentence completion. I learned, and they have to fill in. I relearned, or I was surprised, or if you're trying to do a baseline, you say, I wonder, and it gives the students the opportunity to go on for new learning. And when the teacher has the I wonder questions, it gives you the opportunity to bring some of that knowledge into the classroom because it's something they're really interested in. So sentence starters is a good way to do that. So those are engagement activities. That's how you get that constant engagement going in the classroom. And these don't take a lot of planning. They're embedded in your instruction all day long. You teach them how to do it, and then you just practice it throughout the day. Okay, so I'd like to give you some time now to think about some areas that you're really interested in that you'd like to do your research paper on. As I told you, you have an opportunity to work with a partner if you'd like. So if there's two of you interested in something very similar, this is your time to kind of talk to someone about it. When you come on Thursday to Rick, I want you to come with a brainstorm of ideas that you'd like to research. And then we're going to try to narrow it down by giving you the opportunity to search for specific keywords that would attack the topic that you really want to know about. Now, there's many different ways to choose.
Does the age range matter as to like where we want to target?
That's up to you. I think that if you're an adolescent, you might want to choose an area that would benefit you in knowing about as an adolescent teacher. So yes, I would say it does. I mean, if you wanted to do like music and learning, you know, for the adolescent, I mean, I would narrow it so when you do research, when you come to Rick, we'll put in the age levels to focus on what you're most interested in. If you want to look at specific activities for, say, the content area that you're going to teach for adolescents, you can narrow it down to the activity. But think about this research paper as an avenue for you to research something that's really going to make an important step in your teaching career to utilize in the classroom. So you might have heard about different strategies. Maybe there's something that made you really pique interest that you've never heard about before that I introduced you to in the cognitive learning. Maybe there's a different theorist that you'd like to research with educational avenues. It could be something like Brain Gym. You can even use your book and scan into the topics that are in your index in the book and see, are there further things in the chapters that we're going to talk about that you never knew about that maybe would be interesting to research. Whatever it is, don't make it a topic that you're going to dread doing this paper. I really want you to learn from the information that you're finding. So take a few minutes time now and see if you can come up with some brainstorming activities so you're ready to go when we come in. Yes. Yes.
I was gonna do
Yes.
learning disabilities, second component being like self-esteem, like how it affects self-esteem, how it can build their self-esteem.
Yes. So, learning disabled and self-esteem and activating learning.
Yes.
So, what I would do is.
Do we only need one component?
Yes. Yes. To narrow it. I have this great book. It's 90 days of student learning. And it has to do with motivation and self-esteem. Now, if there's a topic that you're interested in, I want to know what the topics are because I have lots and lots of my own resources at home and lots of my own journals and books. So I can absolutely loan you some of mine to get you started because a lot of references are in those books on the back. So let me know and I will certainly bring, like think about like if you wanted to do something like differentiated classrooms, differentiated learning with mixed abilities. Yes. Now, think about autism is a huge area. So let's narrow the scope. Would you like to do autism with specific grade levels? Okay. So So you want to do something early on. Okay, early on. So identify or identify specific you'll know these as you start searching and bringing up topics.
Okay, all right.
That's a good way to do it. Oh, that's good, yes. I have, oh, okay, yes. I have a whole, I'm teaching male students, and then I have, so that would be a huge area. Right now, they're doing a lot of things with that. Yeah, and some schools are actually doing second grade. Oh, yeah, that's right. But you're going to narrow the range a little bit, right? Or, that's huge.
Yeah, production, Asperger's, and social studies.
Okay, that's right. Okay, that's good. On see if there's.
I think high school testing with students with disabilities. I don't know, I found it there like pretty interesting. I don't know how much, yeah. I don't know how much information.
So you need to talk to her.
Alright, these videos.
Yes.
I was trying to find that one very good the other day. I missed it.